Morning guys and welcome back to the circus that is Formula 1. Russell and Verstappen getting after it today as the questions around Mercedes continue to swell. Verstappen does not deny by any means conversations between his camp and Toto Wolff, but George Russell said something rather interesting indeed, saying that Toto's given him his words that he is going to have that drive next season, but is still having conversations with Max behind the scenes. Does this open the door to a potential blockbuster Verstappen-Russell partnership at Mercedes next year, which many of us thought was not at all possible? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. This man, you may not be familiar with, is Tim Mayer. Now, we talked about him last year because he was a steward for the FIA and he got sacked by Mohammed Ben Sulayem over some very petty stuff. Now, he apparently is going to be running for FIA president this year. We know that with Carlos Sainz Sr. pulling out, there wasn't really a candidate to potentially go up against Ben Sulayem, but Tim Mayer, who was fired by the guy last year, is now poised to announce a bid, expected to be announced tomorrow. There's a bit of drama about him just because he's the son of Teddy Mayer, former McLaren team principal. So again, I'm sure Ben Sulayem's going to say, oh, he's biased again, you know what I'm saying, in favour of McLaren. We'll see what actually happens in due course, but that's some drama to keep an eye on. Ferrari are bringing a new rear suspension. We thought it was going to arrive at Silverstone. It's not. They now say it's going to arrive for Spa, which is in a good couple of weeks' time. That is going to be right at the start of the second half of the Formula 1 season. But they are going to do, apparently, a 200-kilometre test day at Mugello and going to use the new rear suspension there. So, people are saying, oh, it's a smart move. They get to test it out before they bring it to the track. Then they can decide when and if they're going to introduce it. Hopefully, the answer is when, and presumably at the following Grand Prix. So that's to come. We may get some rumours over the coming weeks then in terms of what that rear suspension actually has done to the car once they test it for 200 kilometres. We know that a race distance is 300 kilometres, so it's going to give them a good sense of what that car is going to be capable of doing with the upgrade. But let's talk Silverstone. This is Lewis Hamilton dazzling his way into the paddock today. Of course, hoping for a good weekend with Ferrari, of which there have not been many in recent times. But this is a rather dazzling looking car. This is the McLaren in the chrome livery. If you guys didn't see yesterday, this is what they're going to be rocking with for this weekend. The car should be just as fast, but it's going to look rather different on track with the chrome thing they've got going on. The front, I'm not going to lie, it doesn't look quite as good in real life as it did on the renders, but who knows, maybe under the sun or potentially under the clouds, because it might all be raining this weekend at Silverstone. We'll certainly get to that over the coming minutes, because that could be a critical feature of this weekend's Grand Prix. Lando, is he the favourite for the Grand Prix? Certainly not far off. After winning in Austria, he's got to be up there. Maybe you can still consider Piastri, given that he's been the stronger of the two McLaren drivers so far this season. You can never count out Max. Probably can never count out Hamilton, let's be real, but it's not like Leclerc is a slouch around this circuit either. He's had many great results here, and unfortunately for him in 2022, Ferrari decided that they would make a Ferrari decision. Norris says, this is the one that I want to win the most, and there's been lots of talk coming out of the McLaren camp, especially around the Red Bull situation. Helmut Marko actually defended Yuki. Yuki's his boy. We know that Marko liked Yuki. And even Isaac Hadjar said this, and he was like, I don't know what's going on at Red Bull. All I know is Yuki's very quick. And he's getting absolutely ripped to shreds, maybe, by that RB21. Marko says, yeah, Yuki's not been great, but also it's not really his fault. It's kind of our fault for building a car that seemingly only Max can drive. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting things there at Red Bull, but it is no real secret that if they did not have Max Verstappen, they would be absolutely nowhere. And as Zach says, they'd be behind Racing Bulls without Max. Max is straight up carrying them. So Max may not stay, or he may stay. We don't currently know, but there is a real feeling now, especially today, that Max leaving the team day by day feels like a more realistic possibility. In Formula 1, there's no smoke without fire, and there's bloody flames gushing out of all of the windows at this point, right? Like, they're really, it's very evident that something is happening. Whether the fire will be put out in time, that is another question, and we're going to get to that in a second. Just a couple of things on Ferrari. Leclerc says we're improving step by step. We cannot be fully satisfied as the end is to try and target to win races. Silverstone is a race we have been pretty competitive. Lewis is exceptional here. I'm hoping we have a shot at victory. Maybe if the new rear suspension arrived in time, they would have had a chance. Hamilton, though, is really thinking about next year and actually sent some other interesting comments because he made a point a while ago that this car, obviously, is kind of, I wouldn't exactly call it a Charles Leclerc car, but Leclerc's been at the team for years. Hamilton was making the point that the development direction that they have taken has obviously not been inspired by Hamilton. Hamilton has his ideas, and maybe Hamilton could make the argument to go to Ferrari and say, hey, yeah, Leclerc and Sainz, whatever, they've done a great job in recent years, but the car that you've currently formed based on their feedback is not delivering results. Maybe listen to me for a year or two. That's what Hamilton, I imagine, will be saying, certainly to certain people. Whether that's a good or a bad idea is a debate, but Hamilton says, I'm working with Loic, and this is the particularly interesting thing about this. Obviously, we're talking 2026 here, but that's where Hamilton's focus currently is really lying. But Loic Serra used to be his boy back in the Mercedes days, and he's now over there as the head of the technical department effectively, and he says he's working with Loic and all of the guys at the factory to make sure the next year's car will have naturally some of my DNA in it. There's clearly a way that Hamilton likes to drive that these current Formula One cars, like in the ground effect era, don't really prefer. And this year's Ferrari seems to be no exception to the rule to that end. I think next year's cars should be better for the way that Hamilton wants to drive. They should be less needing to be driven within the limit, let's say, but who really knows? And hopefully we'll be able to get some of the characteristics that I'm hoping to have in it for next year. So clearly Hamilton's kind of saying, look, this year's car doesn't really suit what I want out of this machine. Hopefully next year's will, and he's got the connections maybe to make that happen, and maybe the leverage internally as well. This was a comment from Aston Martin. They're building their car for 2026 too. Unsurprisingly, Adrian Newey's probably cooking up something rather special. Whether the Honda power unit can compete is another question mark, but Aston Martin say they are seeing encouraging signs from their concept. Maybe that's a bit of a sign to George Russell to say, hey, we're open if you guys want to come, if you want to come over here, because Russell has been having conversations. This is the very interesting thing. I think that even Christian Horner said this, that Russell has been talking to some people, but not much, so he feels like Russell's secure, but, Russell has been having conversations. He talked with Briatore. I'm sure that he's had some little feelers out there to see what the market interest is. I don't know if that's true for Andrea Kimi Antonelli, and that's the really interesting part of today's comments to me, is whether what we thought was not really possible could actually happen all of a sudden. Now, Alonso, who currently is at Aston Martin and certainly won't be intending to leave, but if Russell's available on the market and Lance Stroll isn't going anywhere, I don't know, I don't want to say it, but it's a non-zero possibility right now that Fernando is forced out of that team. Hopefully he would get to drive somewhere else in that scenario, maybe in Alpine, that was talked about recently. But Fernando says, I can be a consultant, but they need to pay a huge amount of money, and at the moment, no advice. So Fernando's like, okay, I'll advise the guys if you pay me a fat bag. And frankly, Mercedes will have to give a fat bag to Red Bull to sign Max Verstappen, such is the current rumour. But at the summer break, if Max is, let's say, fourth in the championship, then it changes the story to some degree. Hamilton even commented on this and said, because everyone was getting asked about it, if anyone was going to ask me about Mercedes, it's an amazing team with naturally the passion. They've got great personnel, great factory, great environment to work in. So, of course, I would say be interested to see what happens. So, gives Max a bit of an endorsement and says, hey, if you want to go to Mercedes, it's not a bad team after all. So let's talk about what these guys had to say. George Russell said a lot of very interesting things today. Clearly he knows more than we do, and clearly he knows more than he's letting on at times. So you have to sometimes look at, I'm not going to do body language analysis, but I'm going to look at the way that he worded things as to whether it means anything. George says, I'm just focused on the driving, my home race, my favourite race of the year. I want to give it my focus and attention to try and win it. Temperatures look more favourable compared to Austria last week. We'll see those in a few minutes' time. He also was asked, does Mercedes provide you the best chance to win a Drivers' Championship? And George says, I think so. Going into next year, there are so many unknowns. For us, both sides, our best opportunity of winning is to continue as we are. I've been working with the team now, going into my 5th year, which is very true. George will not intend to leave, and George also made that very clear. There hasn't been a lack of interest, but I am loyal to Mercedes. So we know that Aston Martin, probably Alpine, and maybe some other teams would have at least got on the phone and said, hey, George, I noticed you don't have a contract for next year. Do you want to have a bit of a chat? George, of course, is, he doesn't have much leverage because he's not got another better team to go to. Mercedes can call the shots. The rumour was yesterday that they'd offered him a 1+1 year deal and he wasn't very happy with it and wants a longer term contract to kind of secure his spot at the team longer term. Probably fair enough, but he doesn't really have the leverage when Mercedes potentially have a better driver available, ready to go and ready to join them if the circumstances are right, and George doesn't have a better driver, better offer out there either. George, I think, is excellent, but Max Verstappen is still Max Verstappen. So Russell went on to say, there are a lot of conversations behind the scenes that are not public, and I know where their loyalties lie. Effectively, meaning Mercedes. So that's very telling, right? There are a lot of conversations that are not public, and I know where their loyalties lie. He went on to talk about Toto and said, Toto has never let me down. He's always kept his word and does what's best for the team. I don't think I am going anywhere. It's normal for a team to explore options. I don't take it personally. I want to continue with Mercedes. And I think that's also what Rory mentions here. He's got to do what's best for the team. For me, it's nothing to worry about because I don't think I'll be going anywhere. So this is the key statement, I think, to analyse here, really. Russell says, I've had conversations behind the scenes with Toto, and effectively, he's given his word to me that I'm going to be a driver for Mercedes next season. He's never let me down, he's always kept his word, and he does what's best for the team. Now, doing what's best for the team is a very interesting way to put it, right? Because does he mean that it's best for the team to keep him on? Which, of course, he will think is true. Or does he mean that it could be best for the team to sign Max, but simultaneously, I don't think I'm going anywhere. For me, there's nothing to worry about because I'm not going anywhere. So, Russell makes it very clear. I don't think I'm going to be leaving the team. And I don't think Russell would have commented on it as much as he has done if he thought he was. Because Russell has almost been the first to mention this in recent weeks. It's not like the media's been, really hounding it. Yeah, they've asked him questions, but often it's been Russell who has said, yeah, the team's looking at Max, and then everyone asks Max, everyone asks Toto, and then the circus goes around. Russell's kind of instigated it to some degree. I don't know if he would necessarily do that if he really felt like his job was on the line. And Russell says today, Toto's effectively given me his word. I don't expect him to change on it. I expect him to consider what's best for the team, but I think I'll be staying here. Whether that's just blind self-confidence from George, whether he doesn't see the writing on the wall, it's a question, but I think there's a bit more to it than that. Like, I would be surprised, having heard what George has said today, if he does indeed get kicked out of the team. For me, it's nothing to worry about. I don't think I'll be going anywhere, and whoever my teammate will be, it doesn't concern me either. And that's another little piece, right, that maybe implies that George is very confident that maybe his seat is the safe one. Maybe it's the other seat, which is not quite so safe. And that's where things, I think, today get particularly compelling, because the way that George says this today, I think the chances maybe haven't increased dramatically, but I will say, based on the comments from George and Max, the chances in my eyes of Max replacing Antonelli have increased today. Maybe they are still not substantial. I still think that if Max joins Mercedes, Russell should be concerned, but there is an argument here. Now, Antonelli has been about as good, I think, as Mercedes maybe expected him to be. He's had his moments, he's had his weaker weekends, he's not, really impressed to such an amazing degree that he's beating Russell on, let's say, 30-35% of weekends. That's not happening yet, but he just got his first podium very recently. He's just finished school. I think he's only going to get better and better. Mercedes have seen that for a long time. But given the way that the market currently is, there maybe is an option for Antonelli. Like, there's no way that Mercedes want to say, all right, Kimi, it's been a fun year, but we're going to put you down again to reserve driver and leave you to not really develop. Of course, there is a fear that you put Antonelli alongside Max and he just kills him. So that's maybe something to consider as well. But also for Antonelli, there's now the Alpine situation. Like, I'm just, going to put it out there because the Alpine situation is so much in flux. Briatore is literally talking to everyone and anyone under the sun, talking to Bottas. It's all going on. Alpine, they can build a reasonable race car, but what they can't do is build a good engine. And next year they're going to have Mercedes engines. So all of a sudden it's not just you're talking about Williams, you're talking about Alpine as a potentially interesting customer team that could be somewhere that Kimi could go for a couple of years before returning to Mercedes. Not an impossibility if the conversations are had, but then you've got to rely on Flavio Briatore, and maybe that's not the best idea. But Montoya made the comment, and many others kind of recognise this. I thought it was nice to see how, let's say, pleasant Max was to Kimi after the mistake that he made on the first lap in Austria. And on some level, Max might have thought, damn, good job, Kimi. If you put me down to 4th in the championship, I can get out of this contract and I can come and take your seat. Or take George's seat and be your teammate. So, Montoya made the point. Max was so nice to Kimi after the collision. Are they already teammates? I mean, look, I don't know. I'll just put it out there. So that's the Mercedes side. I don't know. In my head, I still have a difficult time believing this is actually going to happen, but I will say, based on George's comments, he clearly knows more than he can say or that he's letting on, and he seems very confident he's going to keep that seat. So, I don't know, but it makes me think that this Verstappen-Russell partnership, as much as if I'm Toto, I've got to be kind of insane to do it. I'd love to see it. Hopefully it happens. I mean, wow. It'd be a crazy lineup, in the positive and the negative sense, quite possibly. But what does it mean for the future? Because if, Mercedes were to get Max, they are compromising something, to say the very least. So, Max was asked about this, and in the past, Max has made it very clear, I've got a contract until 2028, I'm going to see out my career with Red Bull, that is the plan. Max is now very different in his assessment. I do not talk about my contract, no decision has been made at the moment. For me, it's not about 26 or anything, I just concentrate on what's coming and the cooperation in the team. Many people come with assumptions, that certainly does not come from me. As I said last week, that's all I can say. I don't think anyone can say with 100% certainty that they feel completely comfortable about next year. There are so many unknowns anyway, the only thing I can do is drive as fast as I can with what I have. Nothing to add on that. I think that's the story in life. The grass is always greener on the other side, right? I think you'll always have to stay calm and enjoy what you're doing. I think up until now I've had a lot of success. Maybe this season is not what we want as a team, but that can happen as well. So, very carefully media trained. But he did say a couple of more compelling things. He was asked the question, are your representatives talking to Toto? And, Max is like, what do I say to this one? Is there any truth? Well, to be honest, I've got nothing to say. So I think that's pretty clear what's going on there. With what I said last week, I've got a contract with the team. We just focus on performance. So, very Max Verstappen comment. But yeah, Max wasn't really sure what to say about this. And he's like, well, yeah, maybe I shouldn't say anything right now. And he was asked the question, your entourage is talking to Mercedes. That's what Mercedes say. And he's like, yep, well, nothing to add. So I think that kind of tells you where we are. The most interesting comment, I will say, of the day here was probably from Eric Van Haren. We know how closely connected he is to the Verstappens, to Jos, maybe, Verstappen, whatever, that group over there. This is his comment on it. We know that he kind of shut down the reports that there was an offer from Mercedes, but he did say this, within now and about a month and a half from now, so pretty much now in the summer break really, it will be clear whether the current number 3 in the standings will simply continue for Red Bull or will switch to Mercedes. So that's pretty compelling, because it shows there are 2 options on the table. Realistically, Aston Martin not in the conversation. It's a choice for Max. Depending on what happens, maybe the driver's standings and the contract clause is going to affect that at the end of, the summer break, just before the summer break. But effectively, he's either going to stay at Red Bull or he's going to go to Merc. And now you've got, the top guys that know the Verstappens in the situation saying this very clearly. Van Haren's not saying, oh, they're not considering it or whatever. He's saying, yeah, it's a consideration. There's interest from both sides. The decision will be made in due course based on various factors. Verstappen was also asked the question, there was a rumour the other day that his camp wanted Horner to go, because if Horner went, then Jos Verstappen would be happier about the direction of the team, and there was some belief that that was going to be a positive step and that the Verstappens were using their leverage to force the changes they wanted. Max says, I don't know anything about that, so make of that how you will. Max also did, the one thing he did really shut down was the idea of a sabbatical. We've definitely talked about this, haven't we? The conversation around, okay, who knows who's going to be the best in 2026? Take a year out, race Le Mans, spend time with your daughter, whatever, and then come back in 2027 when you can just pick and choose the best team. That's an option, but Max says no, absolutely not. I'm going to stay in F1 for sure and in the future. Combine that with any other kind of racing that's possible. That's what I can prepare for. So thought that was kind of interesting, but very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. And as I promised, just one final thing. Let's have a look at the weather forecast. This is what F1 put out, which is kind of useless. It's like, well, it's sunny, rainy, rainy. But obviously, is it raining or is it raining? That's the big question. So this is what it looks like on BBC Weather. This is Friday. Tomorrow, it looks like nice, beautiful, warm sunshine all day. Saturday, maybe some drizzle in the morning, and during, potentially qualifying, more than likely it's going to be cloudy with probably not much rain, but the track could be pretty green if it has rained overnight. And then Sunday, around about race time, we are expecting right now some rain. Right now it's in the morning, and around about race time you're talking, 32% chance of rain or something, and it would only be drizzle. So it's not like the race is going to be chalked. But yeah, there's a very realistic possibility around race time here on the Sunday that we get some rain disrupting the weekend. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.